Welcome to Command Shift Left, the podcast that helps you navigate the treacherous waters of the software development, ops, and security world while also diving into the hot current trends in the industry. Join myself, developer Philip, our co-host or Vice.
Hey audience!
As we battle through hilarious real-world stories, pro tips and hacks for navigating your way around developer security, learning about our Shift Left life, and life stories that have saved our ass. It's super awesome to have two guests today. We've got Eden and Mike. If you'd just like to give a short introduction about yourself, and maybe let's start with Eden.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Eden Fulgo. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Mobot. Mobot is a New York City-based Series A startup, and what we do is we build and operate mechanical robots to do iOS and Android mobile app testing. And the reason you should use a mechanical robot to test is because we can actually cover test cases like push notifications, multi-device testing, location services, Bluetooth, that are really traditionally difficult to automate with typical software frameworks.
Very, very cool. And Mike?
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for having me. My name is Mike Bifulco. I'm CTO of Craftwork. We're a Charlotte, North Carolina-based tech-enabled home services company helping homeowners connect to super high-quality interior paintwork. We were founded earlier this year and will be expanding across the U.S. Over time. Our website is craftwork.com. I'm also co-founder of a developer community called APIs You Won't Hate, and I publish a newsletter for product builders on my own site at mikebifulco.com. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. I had the good fortune of being a guest on Mike's show, and I had a blast.
And in the same way, I also had the great pleasure of being a guest on Eden's podcast called How It's Tested. And that was very fun. And I think now, without any further ado, we can get started with our first fact. And that fact is by Mike. Mike, take it away.
Yeah, so this has been a bugbear of mine for a long time, and I think it comes from my experience so I went to undergrad, I studied computer science and became like what you would call a traditional developer. I learned the fundamentals of computer science and all these other things. And I came out of school with this notion that I wanted to work on shinier things. And in my case, the shinier things were front end type things and building user interfaces and this and that. And at my very first job, I was told you can't work on user interfaces and do design stuff unless you learn about design first. And in that moment, this was a mentor of mine at Microsoft when I was working there. What I essentially learned through a crash course is that design is something that is not necessarily something you're born with. I think that's the misconception. A lot of people feel like, oh, I'm an artsy person or I'm a creative person. And many design things are science. They can be learned. They can be taught. You can read about them and become pretty good at them. And I think that that's a fundamental truth that would benefit nearly all developers, project managers, program managers, product owners, whoever you are, to have some fundamental understanding of these things. It's almost a responsibility if you're building a product or a service that affects anyone. And it creates a much better understanding of what you're doing and how it connects to the people that are using things. So to take a step back on that, there's lots of psychology that goes into design that is like verifiably true because we can do experiments on it and see how people's brains work. And we can use the scientific method to validate assumptions that we're making. The most simple example of this that I can think of is this thing called Gestalt psychology. It's a type of cognitive psychology that just tells you how your brain like groups things together. So if you imagine seeing like a group of 5 things and all of them are gray except one is blue, mentally your mind is going to think that blue thing is different, and so it's going to grab some more attention from you than the other things. You'll think that's more important. And that's like a feature of our brain, and understanding how those rules work together and how they sort of roll up can result in making really good software feel really good. The converse of that is that when you don't know that these things exist and you don't take advantage of them, not understanding that making things look just a little bit different draws attention is really dangerous. Like, you can create an application that people don't like to use because it's confusing, because their lizard brain and the stem of their cortex there is like having experiences that you didn't intend them to do. And so my sort of call to action for developers everywhere, and even designers and wherever you work in the world, is that one of these things you should do is just kind of do some reading about this. It's not super dense. It's really interesting. One of my favorite things in this world is color. theory. Color theory is a
Mhm.
thing. It's not
Very
just
interesting.
I understand colors or I don't. It turns out the relationship between 2 colors, 3 colors, 4 colors, and whether they quote go together is math, and you can do formulas for that. And if you have a notion that your brand is a green color, you can determine the things that are go well with that particular green color by applying a little bit of mathematics. I'll give a plug here for a TikTok account that is one of my favorite on the internet. It's Color Nerd. Color.nerd is I think he's a color scientist and shares some of the most fascinating and normal human understandable explanations of how color works that have like continually blown my mind on the subject. So yeah, that's my feeling. I think design is a fundamental truth and something that's very important, and that once you understand that you can learn it, you become better at everything.
Yeah, this really resonates with me because when I was studying computer science, I always liked the code, but I always liked creative code, and that's kind of where my YouTube channel and everything originated from. Because I was always into web dev, but I was always into creative web dev, and I always read that yes, well, you can do web dev and you can do creative web dev, but you need design skills. And I was like, well, I don't have any design skills, nor I can draw well or maybe pick and color match things well. But actually, as I started diving into the concept and learning more about it, I've realized that, like you said, it is pretty much maths, and you can figure things out based on just facts almost. And to my surprise, I was able to generate a bunch of like really good pieces of work that actually looked good. Not being someone who's skillful in creating artsy things. So I can definitely agree with that, and it totally resonates with me actually.
With me, it also resonates, but from a different angle. One of the things that I really like is to apply the engineering mindset to other things in life. I love doing it with biology, and I love doing it with psychology. So, and what you talked about, Gestalt, really kind of resonated with me, and with a book that I recently read, Thinking Fast and Slow, which is both about economics and about psychology in general. And reading that book, I was basically thinking, oh, so we're basically a microservices based architecture. And we have these two services constantly exchanging queries and HTTP calls essentially between one another. And I find that engineering mindset that when you can apply it well to things, I think not only makes it more accessible to you, but also enables you to give it access to other people. We can basically boil it down to the same classic mechanics that we use for everything. Maybe this would end up connecting to this trend that we're seeing of everything as code. So maybe that's what's coming next. Maybe it will be design as code. Maybe it will be human psychology as code. Oh, here's a Rust implementation of your need to talk to your mother or your need to eat sweets. And here's where you need to just set a breakpoint to meditate more about this. So yeah, I'm loving it. It's a really great fact.
Yeah, and I think I've also seen this in a more practical sense on a day-to-day where in the last 3 to 5 years, I feel like the learning curve to even use tools, like even if you as an engineer have the design instincts, you have to be able to communicate, collaborate with other members of your team, product managers, QA professionals, other engineers, UX people. And I think what's been really cool is tools like Figma, Balsamiq, InVision are easier to use than ever, with more collaboration features than ever before. You can have multiple people on the same screen. You can make mock-ups. And I think that also changes the way that the design role and the design instincts that engineers get to have and participate as a part of the process.
Definitely.
I think those are all really interesting abstractions too of these other things. Like this is a great case where we've done the science to figure out what it's like to build a good user interface, and it turns out that like one of the fundamental things there is just aligning stuff that you see to a grid, and the fact that that's built into Figma and Balsamiq and InVision and all these things is just like the smart people have done the research and gotten there. Much in the same way that like we've decided that when you're writing a line of code, like you probably want something like a string that's different from a Boolean, that's different from an integer, and different from a decimal and things like that.
Where do you think machine learning and AI agents would be coming into this conversation? Like, I feel they already are, but what's your sense of it?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, I think a lot of the machine learning tools that can read images and kind of assess them could give you a pretty good heuristic of how usable your interface is and things you could do to make improvements. That grid layout is a perfect example of that. Like if there's one thing on your page that violates the grid layout, you might want to know about that. And if that's the result of a code change and you're not thinking about that interface, then you could automate that using machine learning. Honestly, some of the other things you can do is just produce things like a style guide with an algorithm, right? You could say like, create me a type ramp. And so a type ramp is this notion that like the most important thing on your page, the H1 should be biggest and boldest. And as things get less important on the page, they should be smaller and less standout-ish from all the other stuff. And those are all things that you can kind of apply some logic to. And I could say, give me a type ramp that feels like Philips product, right? Where you say like, this is a product that is going to be relying mostly on bright colors or, earth tones, things like that. And you can kind of come out with results that are useful in that case. I think there's probably also smarter people than me working on this. I mean, usually that's the case. And accessibility tools are a great example of that too. So a lot of accessibility stuff is like, can someone read this web page if they are hard of hearing, or if they are colorblind, or if they have trouble, reading things close up? Accessibility tools already do that with just math and without, much AI applied to it. And one of my favorite tools for that is called Stark. It's a plugin that you can add to Figma and to all these other design tools that just will tell you that like, hey, you put white text on a yellow background and nobody on earth is going to be able to read that. Here's what you need to change to make it nicer for everyone. And like, that's awesome. That's math applied to a problem that feels like a design-y thing. And that abstracts it away from me having to fully understand it. I really love that kind of stuff.
Seeing as most of our audience is developers, and most of us are developers too on this call, what do you think about design specifically for developers? Probably there's like a commonality between us and other regular humans, but are there like unique aspects for designing for developers that you've noticed?
For sure. Yeah. I think that you start to hear a lot of terms used around the developer world that are used as a replacement for I don't need to learn development. Like, I'm not a UXer, or I don't do UX UI, and I don't understand all these things. So like, I just give me the picture and I'll make you a pixel perfect implementation of it. I think we've all felt in practice that like the pixel perfect implementation is sometimes problematic. Like you kind of need to do some interpretation of what a design file means to make it the useful thing that people who will end up using something has. And so there's this whole world of designers who can also write code. I've worked really closely with some amazing designers who can write CSS and HTML and sort of hand off like a somewhat functional demo as something to iterate from. And the more that like line kind of blends between I'm a developer and I'm a designer, I think the better off the whole team gets, because then you're not putting the whole onus of understand human psychology on like the one person in the room who is already busy trying to think about everything else. Like it can be all of our job. I promise this question wasn't actually a plant in the episode, but my alma mater, a company I used to work for called Gymnasium, makes some really great free courses online for teaching design fundamentals to developers. So the gymnasium.com has some really cool courses. One is called UX Fundamentals. There's one called Information Design and Visualization Fundamentals, and they're exactly that. They're like, hey, I'm a developer and I'm curious about design. How can I start learning? It's free. They're amazing. They're taught by world-known experts, and they've helped me learn quite a bit too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really special is like at Mobot, the product that we're designing, the end users are often engineers themselves, because essentially we've built this web platform where you go on and you log into Mobot and you see all of your test results that a robot executed. So the screenshots, the data, the logging, because we provide timestamps, screenshots, everything is all in one place. And what's really special is because engineers are building the product for fellow engineers for themselves, I think there's more buy-in from our team. Instead of like delegating the responsibility or thinking about design to, a separate team, they are more empowered to give feedback and suggestions during the development process, which I find really exciting, because sometimes there are ways to just like, actually, I think the view of there should be more data, denser content on the screen. And engineers don't mind that. They're like, I want to see all the logs in the same place. I want the logs to be filterable. I want to be able to see the dashboard in this way. Like these two charts should be next to each other. And since the product that Mobot is Mobot is built by engineers for engineers. I think that's a sort of special privilege that we have.
That answer made me so happy. I think that's one of those things where you're building empathy between the people building your thing and the people using your thing, and that's like empathy and communication is the heart of building something that people love. And it's really hard to classify and really hard to describe why that is in some cases. But like very clearly the value proposition there is that like we've thought about this because we have often been people like you and we understand the problem space, and like you start to build something magical and almost intangible there. And yeah, I wish I could bottle that up and just like have it in my pocket whenever I need it.
You can just listen to this podcast episode again.
Perfect. Yeah.
We actually discussed that the best way to kind of get on the side of engineers when you're trying to market something is to gain the developers' empathy into the product and into how that product is used and how much they can gain from it. And that's the best selling point for any developer, because as we always say, advertising to developers is probably the worst thing you can ever do.
Yeah. I've found a really useful thing to make developers care about this, being enabling them with something that is like, you're going to start noticing this and it's going to start bothering you. And giving them something small that like, once you see this, you're going to notice this and you're going to think about why this bothers you. And that is sort of like the gateway into thinking about other areas of design. The one I crow on about all the time is that I really, really, really hate it when I see paragraphs of text online that are all centered text. And that turns out that centered paragraphs are hard to read because you're physically, your eyes are scanning from left to right and you have to go find the beginning of each line, and it's in like a physically different left column. It's tiring to do. So it's just harder to understand that stuff.
That is very interesting. I've never thought about that.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Now
I'm going to see it and I'm going to hate it.
That's your job, and it's your job to spread that word, and you'll make everyone's life a little bit better for that.
It actually kind of makes me think of an example point from that book that I mentioned, Thinking Fast and Slow. They show that in cases where the text is harder to read, people make less mistakes when answering questions that might be a little tricky. Because if the text is easy to read, then system one, the slow system, the fast system is the one that just handles the answering quickly and does this from like your memcache. I'm again applying that same dev mindset. So you just get it from quick memcache. But if it fails to parse, it throws an exception to your system too. And then you bring in your entire might of your cognitive abilities to fully answer things, and then you get things more correctly. So there's also a point here for maybe not justifying to left or right in cases where you want people to put more attention in.
Now, when we write any type of documentation, we on purpose make it very hard to read, so people reread it a few times, right?
Yeah, that's
at least like the parts that are critical. Maybe I think like with Permit. Or with our open source project, Opal, people keep skipping setting up the broadcaster component. So maybe we should make the text there like super blurry, so people will think, wait, what's that part? So they won't skip on it.
I think that just might work. And I also think this is the perfect moment to move on to our second fact, and that fact is by Eden. So Eden, take it away.
Yeah, so my fact is I think that in the next few years, as we continue to shift left in many different engineering teams and organizations, testing is going to become more human-like. And I mean that in all different types of testing, not just UI testing or functional regression testing at the top of the testing pyramid, but I mean even all the way down to API level tests, unit tests as well. And I think the way that software engineers are going to think about building products and designing and writing their code is it's going to incorporate more real world scenarios. And the reason this is going to be possible is there's going to be more tooling released by different frameworks, libraries, companies to enable software engineers to think more about their end users when designing their products. Things like Bluetooth, things like how does my system interact with a different API that it depends on when it's a payment transaction system or an identity verification system or a different device, a hardware device that has unusual battery or graphics card or memory requirements. I think it's going to get easier and easier to think about those kinds of things. And so software engineers are going to develop a different approach. And so I think test-driven development, testing, a lot of that is going to get significantly overhauled in the next 3 to 5 years because engineers are going to be more empowered to take on those roles and that responsibility earlier in the software development lifecycle rather than delegating to product or delegating to QA professionals. I think those folks are always going to still play a big role, but I do feel like there's a rising empowerment for more of that responsibility to be on the engineer, which I think is an opportunity and not a burden. And I think it's actually kind of similar to what Mike was saying about design as well, is just engineers can be empowered with better instincts, so we write better code, as opposed to it being signing up people for more work.
What do you think about testing for the world of AR and VR? Like, I thought that world is maybe drifting away from us, but with the recent release from Apple, I think it requires maybe giving it another chance and more attention. And obviously, there are a lot of unique device and physical aspects there.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that world?
I think that as hardware becomes easier to manufacture, more companies are going to run experiments like this. Like, you remember 10 years ago, or maybe slightly less than 10 years ago, Google Glass was an experiment, and we were all talking about Google Glass for a couple of years. I don't know how, the new Apple Vision Pro is going to turn out, if that's going to end up taking off. I think different experiments have been run throughout the years, right? I think when iPad first came out, we didn't know if that was going to really catch on, but I think the opportunity here is that because hardware is easier than ever to manufacture and there's more known skills, and with the rise of platforms like Raspberry Pi and Arduino, even your everyday engineer can start thinking creatively about solving these kinds of problems and creating these kinds of interfaces, that I think it's going to result in more unique products and more experimentation. So I don't know for a fact that we need to, as engineers, be thinking about designing for AR, VR, but it will involve whatever the next big thing is. There's going to be more of those things. And I think instead of engineers being, caught flat-footed because, oh, great, like Apple just announced another thing. They just launched another thing. Now I have to scramble to catch up. I think the way that we're going to think about evolving design, evolving the way we write code so that systems are more modular and can be added to different operating systems, I think that's going to evolve a lot over the next 5 to 10 years, whether it's Vision Pro or a different system.
One of the things I like about the world we're living in now is that it's no longer a safe assumption that someone using your app will be like sitting at a computer at a desk in an air-conditioned room.
Yes.
And so that brings an interesting level of, I guess I'll use the word empathy again to everything we build. Like that, this is why you need to be thinking about testing APIs on a human level, where, I could be using someone's app and driving my car through a dead zone where, even if it's a podcast app, if I drive through a dead zone and I'm using it hands-free and data goes down, is it a distraction for me to look down and see that the app is failing for some reason, right? There's all kinds of things that happen there. Gosh, AR and VR brings a whole mess of other things into that, but we've all experienced something where you've used something and it's like not really been super thoughtful about where you are or the context you're doing it in. And that's hard to do. That's one of those problems that's massively sized, but you really need to think about it more and more. And it's also something that we've all experienced on some level. So I think it's easy to relate to as well.
I feel so sorry for any designer or any developer where in itself doing responsive web design is difficult, but now they not just have to think about all the different devices, they have to think about the way that they showcase this in VR. Like it's just going to be such a pain in the ass because I just can't call this anything else, right?
I think recently I'm looking at foldable screens and devices with weird sizes of notches on them. Like every time I think about designing UI around those different physical layouts, I'm just like, oh, God, What am I supposed to know now? And next time they'll have threefold or fivefold folding screens, and like even today, like with responsive design and having like a mobile and desktop layout, in essence, what it actually means is that you're having two complete different designs of your website and two different implementations of your website to at least a significant degree. So how many versions of my website do I need to produce? Like in 5 years from now, I have like 100 versions of my website. Where is this headed?
Yeah, I think if responsive design is designing your app to work on multiple screen sizes, I think the thing that we're thinking about now or starting to talk about might be called something like adaptive design, where your app should be thoughtful about who is using it and when and what they're doing. I really love the idea of thinking through that. I have no idea what a logical implementation of that sort of thing looks like. But it's definitely the kind of thing that I think we can all benefit from. And honestly, Eden, with what your team is building at Mobot, like there's so many myriad of uses that I'm really interested in how you're going to end up testing and how your customers are going to end up benefiting from that. Like doing it at scale in a repeatable way is just as important, because you can't just think about it once if you're going to be rolling out new features and interfaces and things like that.
It's interesting that yeah, you mentioned responsive is maybe almost like two-dimensional way of thinking about testing, but adaptive, when sort of there's all these other variables, all these other environments, like it's almost like a three-dimensional or multi-dimensional way of thinking about software engineering and testing. And I don't know if there's like a formal term or someone has thought about that, but I'm wondering if I should go read up about that. Like that should be a thing if it's not a formal best practice or philosophy already.
I think you should go together and coin the term, and maybe even trademark it, get the royalties in.
Oh man, that's really interesting.
There we go. Yeah, we'll all get it on a paper. You know, on some level, I think the first one to be thinking about this was Clippy back in Microsoft Office in 1997, when it was like, hey, I think you're trying to write a letter here. Like, can I do something differently for you? Like, we were not big fans of Clippy, at least universally, but I think that's the kind of thing that we're looking at in the future.
I just watched an interview with the guy that created Clippy, and he said that initially he was ashamed of it because people kept telling him how bad of a user experience this thing is. But then a few years passed, and he, by happenstance, mentioned this to a coworker. He was like, "Oh, I invented this thing," and they were like so excited. "Oh, you created this thing that everybody hates, but everyone knows you're famous." So even though it's not necessarily a good product, it left a very significant impression on mankind. Everyone knows who Clippy is, even if you don't necessarily love him. And maybe that's also something about how we design our applications. Maybe sometimes people love them for their faults and not necessarily for their ideal coverage of all scenarios. That being said, there is one thing that a new mindset of design that I want to add as well. So I want emotional state cognizant design. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I don't have time for all this crap. I don't want to read all of it. I just want the TLDR of any application I'm looking at. Sometimes I'm hungry and I actually want the food ordering app to jump up on top of your app. And maybe other things, I don't know. So I'm waiting for that type of design to become widespread in all the applications we develop, on top of obviously responsive, and we already covered adaptive.
Yeah, I worked on the Google Assistant team for a few years. I was doing developer relations there. And I think one of the dreams of a voice assistant or a virtual assistant or whatever we're calling it in 2023 is to be able to be the one thinking for you about the context of what you're doing specifically. And to be able to offer up to you, 30 minutes before you get hangry, or to say like, hey, this time last week you were ordering falafel from the shop down the block. Like maybe it's time that you should think about that now. Can I put in an order from you? It's a really interesting idea.
I think you should just go ahead and order.
I was just going to say, it should go that step further and just make actions for you, and then you just have to deal with the consequences, whether you like it or not.
No, it would be. I think it could be kind of cool if you give it a budget, how far it can go, and like, oh, you seem a little sad today. Here's a little something as a pick me up, and also plug in some coupons and some freebies from Google. I wouldn't mind it. It will be much better than watching an ad.
Yeah, I think you shouldn't give it a budget. It should just order, and then at one point you're going to realize, oh, wait, I'm ordering this much, and it's like, oh, wait, there's something wrong. Maybe I should stop.
And then it will
Oh, why
go.
didn't I think about ordering lobster for delivery before? This is amazing. And caviar too? Wow.
And then it will go, oh, you're actually low on funds, so I took a loan for you. By the way, now you are a property of this company.
Well, yeah, here in the future, the OS should do the financial management for you. All the basic life skills. You don't even need to give it a budget. It'll apply for your mortgage for you. It'll do everything for you.
It's amazing how quickly in these episodes we end up in a technological cyberpunk dystopia, just starting from a baseline technological topic.
This is how it happens.
Yeah, it's right around the corner. I for one, as I often say, I welcome our new overlords.
Me too. And I think now it's the time for our final fact. And I believe that fact is me. So you know what? Let me take it away. My fact for this episode is that the growth of the low-code market has been so significant this past year that at this very moment there is 500 million applications in the world that currently use some sort of a no-code solution to manage their product. Now, the crazy thing is that by the end of next year, 2024, we're going to have 65% of applications all around the world use some kind of no-code solution. Now, we very often now hear that, no-code and low-code is something that is becoming, very prominent in any application we're building. I mean, we at Permit, we have a whole no-code solution for authorization, which is just a really difficult concept in itself, but yet we managed to abstract it and make it much easier to use and make it a much more friendly interface to, allow more people to use it and to allow other people from the team to use it. So now we're seeing this kind of growth in this whole market share where we have website builders which are just generating things on their own and just making things work and making things animated. We have essentially anything can be automated and kind of abstracted in a way that makes it much more usable by other people. And I think a great benefit of that is that folks who maybe didn't have the skill set of doing certain things can now suddenly do a lot more, and they can create like very professional, very good products. So I think the consequence of that is that in the future, what we're going to see is these very, very successful big products and big companies that are only run by maybe 4 or 5 people because they've built something that's just all based on no-code solutions, and therefore they can all manage it because it's not that difficult. What do you guys think about no-code in general and in the growth of no-code in the future?
I am a huge fan of no-code. I'm on the record as saying and encouraging developers to try no-code things because I think there's almost a sense of pride that comes in, like the notion of, hey, I could build it myself, so why would I use a no-code thing? Automation, no-code, low-code can save you so much time, and the important time too of trying something out and seeing if it's going to work first. Like, you can build a no-code or low-code solution for something, and if you really decide you need to customize it later on, you can build a coach-built beautiful thing. But it's a great way to test an idea, especially if you're short-handed or low on time and things like that. There are so many tools coming out that I think people don't even think of as no code and low code that are like amazing for you to be able to put into your workflow. Honestly, probably ChatGPT is a reasonable no code tool,
sure.
right? People use that all the time, and it is no code, and its value speaks for itself. The thing I like the most about it is experimentation, right? Come up with an idea, see if you can find a way to do it without writing code. Time box yourself and see what you learn from that experience. You can do a whole lot of things very, very quickly with no code and low code. One of my favorite sites online for this is Automate All the Things. It's AATT.io, and it's just a continual learning content about how to do things with no code, with like Airtable and all the things that you might have thought of to tie things together. And they have done some insane things with no code and low code solutions, like create software to run an entire conference, which just sounds like that's the sort of thing that you could spin up an entire company around, but they do an amazing job.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm excited about is with tools like Copilot or no code tools, it's going to make the software engineering profession more fun again. I mean, not that it wasn't fun to begin with, but sometimes like some of the engineers on the team at Mobot have told me the reason that they chose to work at our company was because they get to tinker with robots, right? We're not just another crud web app that's just like every other, React app out there with some Postgres database. Like you actually get to play with something in the real world and exercise chops, engineering chops that you don't normally get a chance to working on some other product. So I think these kinds of tools are just going to make it so all the kind of like cookie cutter, boring, if you will, products get designed by simpler solutions. And it makes the engineering profession really focus more on the cutting edge, on the really intellectually interesting problems, because that's why people became engineers, is to solve, interesting brand new problems, not to build another React web app with a Postgres database. So I'm excited for the next few years. I really think that it's going to help more engineers hopefully fall in love with being engineers again. I think many people are already very in touch and they have side projects and everything, but people should feel the way about their side projects that they feel about their main work at main real companies. And I'm hoping, or that's my hypothesis or hope for the world over the next few years.
I think we're really redefining what it means to be a software engineer. To some degree, I found there's existential dread in that. Like I'm losing what I believe I am as a software engineer, but it's growing into something different that I think can be beautiful if it's somewhere around prompt engineering or maybe using low-code, no-code interfaces. But it's definitely going to be an exciting tomorrow as these things grow. And I do want to bring in a different angle onto this. So low-code, no-code is growing as a trend, but another trend that is growing that I think I actually mentioned when we were talking about our first fact is everything is code. So policy is code, configuration is code, design is code, is all of those that we mentioned. So those two trends are both growing, and I think they're meant to collide. And what I'm kind of envisioning or hoping it will end up is low code, no code interfaces that generate code. So in the end of the day, our single source of truth, ideally in something like Git repository, has everything as code, and we can read it, audit it, manage it, debug it all as code in a way that is strictly parsable and parsimonious. But also, it doesn't mean that on top of it, we're writing every line of code ourselves, and there will be a lot of other interfaces that we'll be able to use. And that's actually pretty exciting. So we're sticking with what we love and know, which is code, but adding more exciting layers on top that would make it more approachable for everyone.
Yeah, most definitely. I actually think we're driving into these very specific sectors in engineering. And I think to this day, we had a title of someone called a full stack engineer, where they deal with the front end and they deal with the back end and then deal with the infrastructure. But I think that's kind of a job role we're going to start to lose, because the specific concepts within tech are getting so they require the time of an expert to learn them really well, to execute them. And suddenly I think what we're going to lose is that people are going to start to really focus on these specific sections, working with software that generates policy as code, or working with software that does infrastructure on its own. And I think we're going to fade away from it. And suddenly, the only way to be a full stack developer is to be able to utilize tools that will do it for you, right? But then again, like Or said, it takes away the real engineer from us. So who are we going to be then? What's going to be the new title? It's all interesting, and it's all something that I'm eager to find out as time goes by.
I think engineers will always find a way to embed themselves in the deeply technical problems that they find interesting.
Of course.
And one of the things that these adding code to experiences and no code and low code do is allow them to have a variety of things they can experience. My feeling is that gives an energy to your work that stops you from burning out, because you've been adjusting the same blue link color for 9 months straight and doing little tiny tests on it. And more, my feeling is that by keeping the energy of your team up, which is I don't know how you would even measure that, right? But keeping your team happy involves keeping them creatively challenged and giving them autonomy to try things out. And I love the way that all of these things make it a little easier for us to do it.
Awesome. I think, and on that note, it's a good time for us to wrap up the show. Mike, Eden, thank you so much. You were amazing guests, and I can't wait to listen to this episode again. This was so much fun. And Philip, I'll let you wrap us up.
I think this is the perfect time to wrap up the show. If you liked this podcast, tell your friends about it. If you didn't like it, tell your enemies about it.